Hi, I'm Lorelei, registered dietitian nutritionist. Welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to show you how to make a stuffed squash. I'm starting with a beautiful butternut squash. You can use any kind of squash here, so you could use acorn squash. Spaghetti squash is a little bit different, but whatever kind of squash you have available, maybe it's in season at your market this time of year, go ahead and pick one up. Stuffed squash is kind of like a twice baked potato. So we have to cook it once and then we stuff it and then we cook it again with everything inside of it. So the very first step has to be done a little bit ahead. We're gonna cut the squash in half. Scoop out the seeds. If you want to, you can wash these seeds and roast them like you would pumpkin seeds. And then bake the squash in the oven for maybe a half an hour, 40 minutes until it gets nice and soft. Pierce it with a fork before it goes in, and then you can also use a fork pierce test to test whether it is done when you take it out of your oven. I'm also going to prep some lentils and some quinoa. This is actually a great way to use leftover grains, leftover rice, or maybe some leftover beans. However, I don't have any leftover grains today, so I'm going to cook those. I'm going to cook about half and half lentils and quinoa, and I'm honestly just gonna cook them together. Lentils are a pretty quick cook legume, so they cook similarly to grains cook. I'm gonna use twice the amount of water as I do lentils and quinoa. Boil those on the stove until they absorb all the liquid. Once I've got those ingredients prepped and cooled, we're gonna scoop out the squash and then everything gets mixed together. This is where you can get a little bit creative with it. This is much less a recipe and more of a recipe or meal idea. I'll show you how I'm gonna make a stuffed squash tonight based on the ingredients that I have around, but you should feel free to use what ingredients you have around or flavor combinations that sound good to you. So my squash is roasted. I've got quinoa and lentils that are cooked on the stove, and now we're gonna pull everything together to stuff this squash. Ouch!
Careful, it's hot.
It's hot.
Don't hurt yourself.
I know. Usually I cook this ahead, sometimes a day ahead, but today I did not give myself a lot of time. It's still hot. You know this squash is cooked because you can see, first of all, it's like almost browned on the inside. It's really like wrinkly and roasty here on the outside skin.
It smells pumpkin-y.
And if you poke it with a fork, it just goes right in.
So what we're actually doing here is taking you behind the curtain and making squash sausage, or squassage, as some people call it, because we're stuffing the casings of the squash with its own innards. I'm actually pretty pleased with that one.
Okay, I don't know how well the vegans are gonna like that analogy. I'm gonna scoop this out and into a bowl. It's really soft. This is kind of how you want it. And I'm gonna try to keep the skins intact by leaving just a little bit of an edge of squash around it, because we're gonna restuff these once we mix up all of the filling.
What are we putting in it?
Okay, that's a good question. I cooked some lentils and quinoa. Ooh, it's ripping a little bit, but that's not
You're
the
losing
end of
its
the world.
casing.
I know. It's hard to keep it intact.
It's super hot. Normally you'd let it cool a little bit more.
Yeah, but it's still, there's still prone to tearing. Everything softens, including the skin.
I'm here to lend moral support.
Any other kind of support you want to
I offered!
Okay, you want to scoop out this other squash?
No, I said
Here,
I
I'll give
offered
you
to
the-
help with this. Fine.
Woohoo! My hands are free! Joe's the prep cook, working for me.
Mm-hmm.
I have here some quinoa and lentils, which I'm also going to put in the bowl with the squash. I'm just going to fluff them a little bit. You could use leftover grains or rice or beans, and I may not use all of this. This is going to add a fiber. The lentils add protein, and finally texture, because the squash is really squishy.
Squish squash, we were making some squassage.
However, none of this is seasoned, so we're gonna need to add some seasonings. I'm gonna add a little bit of olive oil. Thanks for doing this. It makes it way easier for me to just focus on adding the ingredients.
Yes, chef.
So now I'm gonna add some salt. I'm not gonna measure. Have I mentioned, I don't measure when I'm in the kitchen very often. I'm pretty sure, although I've made this recipe many times, I have never made it the same way twice, probably. It usually turns out good.
It does.
Part of the reason why it turns out well is because you can taste it before you put it back in and bake it, so you can adjust your seasonings before the thing is done. Pepper.
It's a good Thanksgiving meal. That's coming up. Good fall. Squash always tastes like fall to me.
Yes, it is. This is a winter vegetable. Butternut squash is really bright in color, which means antioxidants.
Also, traditionally, orange is the color of rejoicing, so it's a joyous vegetable.
Yay!
That's what the ancients used to call it.
Orange.
Joy fruit.
Yes. Orange color is usually indicative of beta-carotene, which is a precursor to vitamin A.
If you want to get all sciencey, but if you want to get all history, joyfulness.
I'm going to add a little balsamic vinegar. And squash also has a lot of potassium in it. You did pretty good. All right.
At least I didn't break the skin.
You didn't.
Awesome.
I guess I did that. Joe didn't. Thank you for your help.
Sure.
See, it's delightful when it comes. I have kept the oven on at about 400 degrees, which is what I roasted this squash at. It actually took about 45 minutes because this is a huge squash.
It is.
It may have taken less time with smaller squashes. Okay.
Good luck.
Well done.
Thank you.
And then I'm going to add the other ingredients that I happen to have around. Mushrooms, which I've chopped up. I actually really like mushrooms in this dish. I think that they cook nicely in it. I did not pre-cook these because they are a soft vegetable. They will cook during the rebake of this good old squash. A little bit of cauliflower. This has been pre-cooked. This is roasted cauliflower that I have left over. Use your leftovers. I'm going to use some soy chorizo for flavor and a little protein. I know this is not an ingredient that you may have on hand. I do actually keep it around because I like to use it in some different dishes. It is vegan, it is gluten-free. I get it at Trader Joe's. There are other places you can get it, but it is a processed soy product. So if you prefer to avoid meat analogs, then you can skip this. There's no need per se, but it will add flavor. It also adds a little bit of heat and a little saltiness. You could add herbs here. If I had it, I would chop up some spinach and put spinach in here. Spinach is a soft vegetable. If it's shredded up pretty fine, it will cook nicely with the squash in the oven when it rebakes. You could use fresh herbs or dried herbs, anything like that. I also am gonna throw in some walnuts. This adds, again, another texture. You could use like pumpkin seeds or sunflower seeds or maybe cashews or pecans would be really good in here. Some of you might even like to try like a dried fruit, like a cranberry or raisin. I wouldn't do that with the soy chorizo per se, but find a flavor combination that you think melds, give it a try. Let me know what it is if it works out for you. The last couple of things I'm gonna add are marinara sauce, like straight up marinara. You could add tomato sauce or tomatoes. I think this is gonna add a nice flavor that goes well with the other ingredients. You could also add like salsa here. And I'm gonna add a little cheese. I know if you are vegan, this is not gonna be something you wanna do. I do use cheese occasionally. I'm gonna use feta cheese because unlike something like a goat cheese, this will stay a little chunky. Feta cheese also tends to be salty, so it will add a little saltiness. And again, we're trying to get a lot of flavor in because although squash is delicious, lentils are delicious, quinoa is delicious, they do need some seasoning to really taste good and bring out those fantastic flavors. Sometimes I'll add olives. When I used to make it, I always would put in some crumbled tofu. It's actually a great way to sneak tofu into foods because it just mixes with everything else. You can't even tell it's in there. And because we're seasoning the whole deal, that tofu just gets seasoned along with the squash. Before you put it in the oven, before you put it in the skins, do taste it. See if it's missing anything. I think this is pretty good. You could add more salt. You could add more seasonings or herbs if you felt you needed to. You could just eat this just like this, but it's kind of a little fancier, a little more special if you put it back in the skins and put it back in the oven, heat everything up together, and then I might even put it in the broiler at the very end for the last few minutes to get the top nice and browned. So we're gonna scoop it back into these shells. We want to try to give an even amount to both sides. And as I mentioned, these were actually, this is a really large squash. So this is gonna be 2 servings, but they may be big servings. So I usually end up with a smaller squash and then it's maybe more appropriate, but squash is a vegetable, so it's hard to overdo it on vegetables. The amount of lentils and quinoa that I put in here are probably relatively close to what you would want to use as a portion size. If it doesn't all fit, you can also save the filling and use it for something else later. Or you could stuff like a pepper. If you had a pepper, you could stuff. Bell peppers would be good in here as well, chopped up bell pepper. I'm always trying to kind of reshape the squash. What is this shape? Just a kind of a oblong. This is going to be a really big dinner. But we have no objection to having leftovers in this household. All right, so I'm gonna put this back in the oven. I've still got it at 400. Really, it's just heating. The mushrooms need to be cooked, but there's really nothing else in here that is in dire need of cooking. So I just wanna heat it through, and then I'm gonna put it on broil for a short time to brown the top. So it's baked and it's broiled, and now it's all browned and everything's mingled together. And Joe's here for dinner.
It is. It's a good looking squassage.
Yep. All right, so we're just gonna put it on the plate. Oh, thank you for your help. These are really big.
They are huge.
Yeah.
This is like a large meal.
It is a large meal. You gonna be able to finish this?
I don't know.
Okay, well.
What's the penalty if I can't?
You have it for leftovers tomorrow for dinner.
Okay, sounds acceptable.
All right. So.
Hey.
Just a meal idea, stuffed squash, whole bunch of things in there. Now it's a complete meal.
Stacey.
Yep. This is really a nice way to eat squash. It really makes for a full meal that's both nutritious and delicious. Joe's being less careful than I would be being about the skins, but...
That's not true.
You're doing pretty good.
Yes.
Okay.
Don't throw shade.
Okay. Only praise the Joe. Only praise the Joe. Lovely
No,
job.
but I'm being awfully
Fantastic.
careful. I'm getting all the squash out, which you want to do. So I'm getting down to the bones. You ask why Joe doesn't often help with these things.